and Alex Ross does the cover art, which is probably one of the reasons this book sells really well. Is you can't go wrong with an Alex Ross. They're lovely. He paints really fast, but anyway. Everybody, happy Halloween. Although probably by the time you watch this, it will be All Saints Day or something beyond. Maybe even you'll get to this by Thanksgiving. I have this overlay because StreamYard said, "Ooh, you've got these spooky overlays," and I thought this probably makes things unnecessarily busy, as if the background wasn't enough. Now the foreground is, yeah, this is what my brain is like. So, as I started last week, just kind of going through the bag of books I bought, and as again, let me say up front, it's I am behind, right? So usually what happens is I buy my books and then I read two or three that I absolutely have to out of that week's bag because I just can't wait to find out. And then I usually go back on the weekend and try to get through the big stacks that are all over the place, and catch up slowly. I also have the Marvel app, the DC app, and Global Comics. So I sometimes pick up on books that way and catch up certainly on like some titles through there. And that's going to come back in just a moment here because the first book that on my list is one that I did read, even though it's a number 2 issue. It's Battle World by Christos Gage and Marcus Toe with color artist is Rochelle Rosenberg, and the letter is VC's Travis Lanham. And I did read this because I read issue number 1, because I sort of know Christos Gage. I've interviewed him a couple of times. Really nice guy. We occasionally exchange messages on Facebook. Or is it Meta now? I don't know. Anyway, and Battle World was the kind of concept that I love, not just because Christos was writing it, but because I love alternate universe characters kind of coming together, even as it's confusing. And at least this one in the first issue did a really great job of setting and explaining things, and this issue does too. And it also brings in other universes that you wouldn't expect. And they say on the cover, featuring CrossGen's Mystic and New Universe's Starbrand. A little bit of a spoiler there, but Mystic is never really named in there, but yes, there are a few panels she appears, which I take as a really good sign. If you're not familiar with CrossGen, it was a company founded, I think, in 1998, 1999. Really bold, aggressive publisher with some incredible creators involved and a really fun set of books that were all varied. And and then it didn't last very long because the publisher really had great ideas, but moved way too soon on all of them. All of them. I met him in 2001, I think the second Comic Con I'd ever gone to, and he talked my ear off for an hour and a half on the floor of Comic Con. And among the many things he told me was about how Stan Lee didn't know what he was doing and Stan Lee was crazy. But on the other hand, almost everything that CrossGen tried to do has become pretty standard in the industry. And so anyway, great characters. Disney bought them, and now Disney owns Marvel. And so Marvel now has access to this incredible CrossGen catalog. And Mystic is not necessarily my favorite character entitled out of those CrossGen days. That would really belong to Roos by Mark Waid and the late Jackson Geiss. But it's still great to see it because, like I said, this means that maybe we'll be seeing more. I'm also buying Battle World because I have this hope against hope that Crystar, the Crystal Warrior, will appear. He was in Weird World a few years ago, which was also a spin-off of the kind of Battle World thing that was happening in Secret Wars. So, these are my dreams, that characters that really have no business being in Marvel Comics today show up. And because I love that. And maybe a whole new generation will find that. And since They did do a Crystar figure in the Marvel Legends series, just like they did a ROM figure. It's quite possible that we could see Crystar and the rest of his Crystal Men show up, Crystal Warriors. I also want to point out this kind of follows up with what we were, what I was talking about last week with the history of the new history of the DC universe. And I forgot to mention that, of course, what's happening in DC is DCKO. So it's similar to this idea of Battle World. I think heroes are fighting heroes, and that's mainly the plot, although this is better. But it's better than what I just described. And that is the video gamization of some books. And that's what it feels like. It's Super Smash Brothers Brawl. There's probably a better term for that, but as I've established many times, I'm not really a gamer, and I don't fit in all the jargon there. But I assume that Marvel Rivals, which is an insanely popular game, very clearly, it has an ongoing title, I think, in comic book shops, and I know it's on the app, is the game that I think is probably the game DC Worlds Collide is similar to Marvel Rivals, and I will acknowledge, I think Marvel Rivals came first. We have not yet, no, we have seen, I think, a Worlds Collide book, maybe. I have not read it. But this goes back to like Injustice, just heroes fighting heroes, etc. And then they did a book called Injustice from DC that I have not yet read, but after many, many years, I think I'm going to give in and try, because so many people seem to love that ongoing series that was kind of like the prequel to the video games Injustice and Injustice 2: Gods Among Us. Anyway, the point is that DCKO is going to do that. Battle World is clearly doing this, but it has a good plot. And DCKO may too, but I honestly thought that the intro to that, which is this company-wide crossover, it's a little bit silly. But this is what the New 52 was trying to do. And so I want to give DC and Dan DiDio in particular credit for that movement, even as it was a line that didn't really work for me. A few books were good, but the ones that worked the best were the ones that kind of ignored that there was a New 52. Batman continued along just exactly as it had been, and Green Lantern continued along exactly as it had been. But a lot of books started over from scratch, and it was an attempt. It was stated as an attempt. Look, we're competing with video games, so let's try to get more into that mindset. And so it didn't work. But now that movement is kind of coming back. But I think it is missing the point that, of course, video games became even stronger with their narratives. There's certainly a reason why I do this on Halloween, and Taylor Sheridan, who is of Yellowstone fame and Tulsa King and a bunch of other shows, Landman, that I'll just keep saying, from Paramount Plus, he's going to write a Call of Duty movie. And I said duty, but that was announced this week with Peter Berg, who was the creator of Friday Night Lights. And anybody who's going to bet against a video game adaptation in film right now, we are long past the days of those Bob Hoskins in Super Mario Brothers. They're getting better and better. Good stuff is happening. I'm looking forward to Five Nights at Freddy's 2. That comes out in 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know. Anyway, see, time has become meaningless, except I know that it's Halloween. Video game storytelling has gotten more sophisticated, so now is the time you could kind of match up a little, but I'd like to see just sophisticated storytelling. For example, the other book that I read this week so far is The Mortal Thor, and that was a big deal. I think it made some mainstream media that, he was no longer Thor, he was no longer a god. Well, it's because this is also the reality of storytelling in the 21st century in comics. This is the second run of Thor comics in a big long epic by writer Al Ewing, and I hate when they hide it. Pasquale Ferry, yeah, I love Pasquale Ferry, great art, and Matt Hollingsworth is the colorist, and VC's Joe Sabino is the letterer. And Alex Ross does the cover art, which is probably one of the reasons this book sells really well. Is you can't go wrong with an Alex Ross. They're lovely. He paints really fast. But anyway, this is the previous Thor book, the Immortal Thor, ended with Thor dying. I'm sorry, spoilers, but this has happened before. There was Ragnarok a couple of times in comics, and anyway, and now it's a world in which Beta Ray Bill was the founding member of the Avengers, and there was no Thor, and mythology is legitimately mythology, or at least Norse mythology is. And yet it's very clear that there's a character or two running around that is from Valhalla, from Asgard. And then there's Thor, who has there was a Walt Simonson run in which he took the human identity of Sigurd Jarlson. Jarlson, he is again, but he doesn't know that. He is slowly rediscovering his connection to a now lost mythology. And it's interesting. It's just interesting. I mean, you think these characters that they've been telling stories for decades with this and still finding new things. All due credit to Al Ewing in particular as a writer, because of course he also wrote the Immortal Hulk, which is like, that run is incredible. So those are the two I read this week. Also picked up The Last Halloween by Jeff Loeb, Matteo Scalera, with Dave Stewart and Richard Starkings on lettering. And so, this is this continuation, each issue of The Last Halloween, which is now in this sub-universe of The Long Halloween. This is issue number 10 of 10. This is the final issue. Is, of course, Tim Sale, the artist of the original Long Halloween, which is an incredibly influential book. He passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. So this is a tribute, but it's also a continuation. And it's a series that has a huge influence on Matt Reeves' take on the Batman in film, the Robert Pattinson version. And so this is worth going through. I will be honest, I didn't like Jeff Loeb's work on Hush, which I understand there is a sequel, a Hush 2 going on. It's called something more clever than Hush 2. But I'm not interested. I'll pick it up eventually. But one thing I do love is the first Absolute Batman annual. Looking forward to this, but I am a couple of issues behind on Absolute Batman, so I need to catch up before I read the annual. Certainly, I've probably done this, talked about Conan enough, but here it goes. I buy the regular Conan book in trade paperback from Titan, written by Jim Zub and some great artists there. And of course, yes, the names are escaping me. Give me a break. I'm 60. But this is Scourge of the Serpent is the annual crossover. You can hear I talked about this with Jim Zub at Comic-Con this last summer. But this is the one I buy on a monthly basis because I want to know how the crossover goes with characters like Solomon Kane and Dark Agnes and more. I don't think Dark Agnes is going to be here, but Solomon Kane is. Let's see, as well. And King Kull. And then this one that I have not actually read a prose story of yet is Karawan, John Karawan. He had a partner, and last year's crossover, I think, eliminated that. So Robert E. Howard stories are the two of them, and this is playing out after the Scourge of the Black Stone. No, that's not what it was called. Battle of the Black Stone. So Scourge of the Serpent. So about halfway through the first issue, and then I had to put that aside, and now I have to find that stack again, right? So anyway, so that was good. That's worth my picking up. And because, as I was reminded at the House of Secrets, where I buy my comics, and I do want to shout out to them. It's a great little shop. It's the fabled fifth week, which means I didn't spend nearly as much on comics. My stack is not as thick. When I get to this stack, get to revisit the stack, I'll be very happy because it's light. But this one, also credit writers Alex Segura, Michael Morrissey, Chantel Amy Osman, and artists Craig Cermak and Amelia Pina, colorists Mark Englert and Warnia Sahadewa. And as always, if I ruin somebody's name as I pronounced it, I apologize, and please, write in and tell me it was wrong, and tell me how it would be pronounced correctly. Please don't just say I'm wrong. But I was wrong. Anyway, the editor is Christina Harrison. Oh, the letterer is Jim Campbell and Jody Troutman. Anyway, so what book is this? It's the Dick Tracy Halloween Special. And I want to call out, because I've recommended this to a few people, the title. I think that what's going on from Mad Cave Studios with Dick Tracy is terrific. And I've read a few of the Dick Tracy revivals, and I certainly read some of Max Allan Collins' work on the newspaper strip, and I have a lot of Big Little books behind me. You probably can't see them because there's like a ghost and another open book and maybe a spider covering it. But I have a lot of Dick Tracy's from the 30s, Big Little books, and so I grew up really knowing that character as a kid. And yes, okay, I'll also admit, as a little kid, I watched that now horrendous animated series that was extremely, extremely racist. So don't go find it. Don't go visiting. First of all, it's not a great representation of Dick Tracy, and second of all, it's offensive. But I think I also read on a family road trip. I want to say Ron Goulart wrote a Dick Tracy novel, and my mom on this family road trip would every day give my brother and I each a treat. My brother and me a treat. And, for me, it was usually a book because she knew that, we'd be driving for 7 or 8 hours and I would probably read that book twice. So I did. I read this Dick Tracy novel several times on that trip to Illinois. And we were trapped in a Toyota with little air conditioning. It was a dark time. Anyway, so I know Dick Tracy, and I think that what they're doing with this modification, this modernization, is great. It's still a period piece. It's post World War II. He's suffering a little bit of PTSD, and he's very hard-nosed on crime. But what also really impresses me about this is that the villains show up, and if you know anything about Dick Tracy, Chester Gould made them. They were very weird caricatures. Like the early Batman days are a lot like that. Was clearly borrowing heavily from that. There's no way these faces would have existed in nature. Someone like Flat Top, way too flat a top. But anyway, the art here has actually made it so you see they're clearly the villains that were from the original strip, but they're also it's a little more like believable that they would look like that, perhaps in real life. And Dick Tracy, square-jawed, good-looking guy, and sorry, Mr. Warren Beatty, who currently owns the movie rights, your job is not as square. So this art works, and I would like Warren Beatty to get over his umbrage and let go of the movie rights so that somebody else can make a decent Dick Tracy movie. His wasn't bad in '91, but stop pouting. Anyway, that's just my little political thing. So it is, as we say, it's Halloween. Please, if you haven't already, I did visit my neighborhood and did a piece on the Burbank Clown House. I'm looking forward to Halloween. I hope you're looking forward to Halloween, and by the time you watch it, that you had a good Halloween. And now we'll move to the next event, and looking forward. I'm going to be, at least I believe I'm going to be a guest at LostCon over Thanksgiving weekend. And hope maybe I'll see a person or two who watch this over there. I will always find a way to talk about comics there. And we'll be talking about science fiction fandom, etc. It's at the Hilton Hotel, the LAX Hilton. And, that's Thanksgiving weekend. So again, in the meantime, stay safe. Hope you had a good Halloween and use your powers for good.